Hey guys, welcome back. Today I've got a Troy-Bilt TB30r. Today I'm going to show you how to change the drive belt. So we're going to get into that on this one. And something I'll tell you here on this is a TB30r. Cub Cadet makes a version of this mower. Craftsman makes a version of this mower. Murray makes a version of this mower. Your mower has this style of engine. I'm going to show you real easily how to do this. Go ahead and pull this deck off, and I've seen people do this without pulling the deck off. That's just crazy. Pull the deck off, takes 2 minutes literally. This is also a good time to change your oil. I've already changed the oil in this one, so I'm not going to do that, but you can drain the oil out of this, then you can flip it up on its side. You've seen other videos, I'll put a link to some of those up here. Flip it so the gas cap is on the top, your carburetor's on this side, so it'll be on the top. If you flip it up on these wheels over here, literally just flip it up on its side. And I also recommend taking your battery out so you're not leaking battery acid all over your floor or ground, driveway, whatever you're doing. But if you don't drain the oil out of it, the potential is here this will leak when it's flipped up. So that's why I recommend changing the oil at the same time you're doing this. I do have another video that goes into a lot more detail on changing the deck belt. This video is not going to be about that. Basically, you just drop this down all the way to the bottom, unplug your safety plug right here, take this pin off right here, pull this pin out of this cable, just pull that back. That cable comes out of this little notch right there, and then notice this cable hooks from underneath. Just pick that up, pull that out of there. Go ahead and knock this off of these pins, and then you can slide this deck back, and that lets you pull this belt off the back here on this back pulley. If you can't easily slide this deck out, it's probably because those arms are still down, so go around the other side and raise your deck handle back up, and that'll get those out of the way. I get a lot of questions about this lift too. All this is a manual warehouse pallet stacker that I've just kind of modified here to use it as a mower lift. Comes in real handy for picking these things up. So you lower it, you pull that up. To raise it, you push that down, and then you just pump it up here with the foot pedal. These are not real cheap, but I did get this one from a place I did business with years ago. Got it for like 200 bucks, or like over 2 grand to buy them new. Make sure that's centered on there, and then you can just raise it on up. One thing you can do here is go ahead and pull this right rear wheel off. And you can do this without taking this wheel off, but it's going to make it easier for me to film for you. Usually these wheels will come off relatively easy. Sometimes they get a little stuck on here depending on how rusty this axle shaft is. Yeah, we got lucky on that one. The reason I take that off is you need to be able to get to these 2 little 10mm bolts right here for the drive pulley underneath here. Getting that out of the way just makes it easier than trying to work behind that wheel. But you can do it without taking that wheel off if you want to. Next thing you're going to want to do, this cover here has to come off, but because of this bar here, it won't slide back. So just take the 2 bolts out on each side. You got 4 bolts total. You do not need to take these screws or bolts. Somebody's replaced one of them. Usually it's a screw. But this plastic here is notorious for cracking out and breaking out when you try to remove these. So don't take these out up here. Take these out down here. You have to take these out anyway. We've got the 4 bolts back here out. All we're going to do is lift up a little bit on this. Use a screwdriver if you have to. That'll pull right off. That gives us access to this back panel here. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but these are 1/2 inch, and you need to take this bolt out here is a 3/8. There are only 2 bolts. And these little clips here, usually if you pick up on this and slide it back, they'll come right out from under that. You can see what I'm talking about there. Been a lot of rodents in here, or squirrels. That may even be why this belt is so chewed up. Here are the belts we're after. It's not that difficult to change this top belt if you want to wait and change it, but if you're going to pull it off to change this one down here anyway, it's a good time to change this. In fact, it's a good time to change the deck belt too, since you've already got the deck off. This is the worst belt to change right here. Once we get the belts off of it, this center pulley should freely and easily slide up and down. And this pulley right here is how the speed is changed on this mower. As this belt pulls down in there, it forces this plate up, which forces this belt farther out, and that's effectively how you change the gear ratio on this. I know they call this like a 7-speed mower, but realistically it's a variable speed mower. What I'll do is take a special tool here. This is just a spring release tool. Makes it real easy to hook this. I can just pull this out, let that back through the hole, and then releasing that spring takes all the tension off this to make this top belt very easy to get on and off. Now there is enough room generally to get this one out of here, but since we have to change the bottom belt anyway, This is why we took the wheel off, because we're going to loosen these 2 bolts up right here so I can push this pulley over. You don't have to take them all the way out. We're just going to unthread them until the threads are almost all the way out so we can push this over. And you can see on this bottom belt here, I can't even get my finger in there. Loosening these bolts up allows us to push this over to give us enough room to get these belts out of there. I think I said these were 10 millimeter earlier. They're actually the same size as these bolts here. It's a 3/8 to loosen up the bolts on this pulley. And you can take these all the way out. You don't have to. It just makes it easier to put it back together if you don't have to try to find those holes again. But if you look down inside here, you can see how much of that bolt is sticking through, and just back it out until it's almost all the way out of that little bracket. And that will give you enough room to get those belts off without having to fight getting those bolts lined up again. And this belt will get pinched down in between here sometimes. Just be careful you don't get your fingers in there, because when you pull this top one out, if it's pinched, that means this bottom one's under tension. It's going to pop this plate up, so don't get your finger in there. See how that tightened down, that plate came up. If your finger's in there, it's going to mash it. And having those bolts loose gives you just barely enough room to easily get these belts out of here. And we will reuse that one, but like I said, if you're doing this and don't want to replace that one again in 6 months, just go ahead and replace that one at the same time. Now this bottom pulley here, we have to go underneath. We're going to leave this loose because we still got to be able to get this out from under here. You don't want to try to force that belt off of there, because it will bend that pin, and that pin is needed, as well as this little bracket or this little wire bar right here. That's what helps to keep this belt from jumping off. You'll want to make sure all that's in place, especially if you're having problems with your belts jumping off, because when you release the tension on this, these belts get pretty loose and they'll jump off if all this stuff is not in place. All right, next thing you want to do is this bolt in the middle of the pulley. This is the pulley that runs your deck belt on the bottom and your drive belt on the top. There are little wings or ears on the frame of the mower that will not allow that belt to come out without taking this off. Now I've seen people actually bend this back. In fact, I've done it myself. Sometimes these pulleys will get rusted on here so bad you can't get them off, and the easiest way around that is just bend these little tabs back. It's best to take the pulley off. This is a 5/8 bolt. If you've got an impact wrench, it makes this real easy because the motor will spin when you try to take this off. Keep that from spinning. You can just take the handle on like a hammer or something, screwdriver, wedge that up in there, and what we're doing is wedging that on these little fan blades. You just got to be careful you don't crank on this too hard or you'll bend those little blades. So I'll put that up in there, and that'll keep that from spinning. Somebody's got Loctite on that. Did get a 1/2-inch ratchet with a longer extension so I don't smack my fingers on that thing when it breaks loose. Guarantee that's got some Loctite on it. Hopefully this thing will slide off of there, and it is. We do need to take this little guide pin out here so we don't force that belt between there. And all this is a bolt with a sleeve over it. Just helps hold everything in place. There's no nut on top of it. It's just tightened down into the sheet metal on the frame. Once we get that out of there, we can get this right off of that pulley. And this one here, you can see here on the top. This is why we took these bolts out here. So we can get this up and out of that. Still tight, but you can do it without taking that pulley all the way off. You'll also need to loosen this nut up here on this pulley. It's a 9/16 to give you enough room to get that belt out from between that guard there. And once you get that out, this should all drop down. All right, so there's your pulley. We did not damage any of those fans putting that hammer in there like that. I don't think that's mice damage. I think this belt's just wore out. Now that we got this old belt off, I want to take a little bit of time here to show you something that's very important when you're buying your new belt. This is the correct belt purchased directly from the Troy-Bilt website. That's the part number if you look up underneath your seat or your hood, depending on what kind of mower you're looking on. And something to consider, this is a 35¼ inch belt. This is not the correct length belt, but it is the correct width. It's a 21/32, which you'll see here if you measure them, that is the correct width. Length is obviously not correct, but something else that I want to show you that's also important. This is a V belt, but if you look at this, the V on this, put this on top of it, is nowhere near as deep as a traditional belt. This is a Gates. This is a name brand, very popular name brand belt. B35 is the 21/32, so that's what that B35 means, and then the length. So if you are replacing this, especially on a mower like this that has such a short belt, there's not much room. Even if you get a 35 or a 36-inch belt, a lot of times it will not work on this mower. 35 will cause the mower to still pull when it's disengaged. I do recommend on these mowers that use these very short belts, go with the name, factory brand. This is, I don't know, a couple mowers they mentioned are Columbia, Remington, MTD, Cub Cadet, Troy-Bilt. Just make sure when you get a belt for this, you get the correct belt for your mower. Because if you spend money on a name brand Gates belt, you're going to pay close to the same amount. And something else you need to be aware of, not only the deepness of the V, but this belt here, the sideways ability to flex it. This one is a much stiffer belt to allow it to pull in and out of that variable speed pulley much easier. If you're going to go to the trouble to do this, spend a little bit more money and get the belt that's made for this mower. It will save you a lot of problems in the long run. All right, a couple other things to look at here before you put this belt back on. Make sure all these pulleys are spinning very freely. There's no play in the pulley itself. And very importantly here on this variable drive pulley, this center plate should very easily pull up and drop back down. If that's not working, your belts for one are going to be very hard to put on, but you're not going to have the speed control you need. Also, we got it loose over here from the bolts, but make sure there's no play in the bearings underneath the pulley. This is your transmission drive pulley. Should spin very freely in both directions. Make sure that's working correctly. All right, when you go to put this belt back on, start on the top, and we're going to take this belt and push it down behind this guard, underneath that pulley there, and above the bar that runs underneath it. There's not a lot of room. Get it behind this little brace here. You can reach underneath here too, and just pull that down so it starts to go around this little pulley here. And something else to keep in mind, if you have a flat pulley, like this one here that we took that bolt loose underneath, the back side of the belt goes on that. If you have a V pulley, the V side of the belt goes on it. Once you get that down in there around those two pulleys, then we're going to work this over here. It does help to kind of twist this a little bit to get it under this heat shield. Get that around your variable drive pulley here. Is on the very bottom of that. You do have to kind of push it behind this little wire guard here, and then you can kind of roll that around there. And once we get this on here, then we'll go underneath and get the rest of this done from underneath. All right, from underneath now, when you go to put this belt back on, we're around our variable drive pulley on the very bottom. Our belt runs down along this guide wire here on the top, goes around this pulley here. The flat side of the belt goes around this pulley back here. I've got this off of this idler pulley, the small one over here, so we can get this on here. So what we're gonna do, go ahead and take this pulley. So we'll put the belt around the top of this pulley here. And when we put this up in here, we've got to make sure the belt is on the inside of these little ears that stick down on the frame of the mower. That's your guides to keep this belt on this pulley here. We also have to line up the keyway right there. I'm gonna go ahead and put the bolt in here so this doesn't fall off on me. Then you can pull the slack over here and get around this last little idler pulley. And once you get that in place, everything will kind of fall in where it needs to be. Show you here real quick what I've got. Bottom of your variable drive pulley, the flat side of your belt goes around this idler pulley here. The V side goes around this pulley here. And then we're around the drive pulley with the belt on the inside of those little ears. Once you get your belt on there, just go ahead and take your little guide bolt here, guide pin, whatever you want to call it. Get that started up in that hole there, and then go ahead and snug that down. Go ahead and take your 9/16. We'll tighten this idler pulley back down. This is on the flat side, the back side of the belt. And then on this crank pulley, we're going to use the same trick we did when we took it out. We're going to take the handle of our hammer to keep the engine from spinning over. Put that up in there. And that, I believe, does it for the bottom side. I'll show you one more thing while we're down here that I didn't show you so well when we took the deck off, but your deck belt goes between this loop. Both sides of the deck belt go in between there and then wrap around the bottom of this pulley. And this is a guide to keep your deck belt on that pulley to keep it from sliding off. Okay, back on the top side now, we got our bottom belt back on. This is still loose. We do not have the spring back on this yet, so we can just kind of twist our belt, get it back underneath the heat shield. This is the top belt. Push it back under there and drop it down on that variable drive pulley. And I like to start with that one first. Then we can come around the rear, the large transmission pulley, get it on this. I'll pull that back out there where I can get to that spring, reach through here and grab that, and just pull that back through the side here. Make sure that loops down into that hole there in the frame so it doesn't slide off. And after you get your spring back on there, don't forget to tighten these two little bolts up here on that variable drive pulley. If you took these all the way out, it can be a little challenging to get them lined up in those holes. Once you get those tightened down, that pretty much completes changing the belts out on this thing. Hopefully give us a few more seasons. All we gotta do now is put these covers back on with this back frame, put our wheel back on, put our deck back on. We should be good to go. We'll go ahead and let this thing down. I figured if you've made it this far, you probably didn't need any help showing you how to put the guards and stuff back on. But we got that all done, got our wheel back on. We'll drop it down here, get our deck back on, see what this thing does. All right, I did go ahead and put the deck back on this thing, took it out here and took it for a few laps around the yard. My grass is brown and it's really not much grass here because it hasn't rained for like 3 weeks. Troy-Bilt is working perfectly fine. And if you need more information on how to put this deck on and how to change this deck belt, check this video out right up here. I got another full video that goes into a lot more detail on how to change this deck. But guys, thanks for watching. Until next time.